This is UX Radio. Here are your hosts, Laura Federoff and Chris Chandler.
Today we're talking with Anita Cheng. She's a former cancer researcher who went into tech to help people faster. She gets to do just that, working for government, currently for San Francisco Digital Services. As a content designer, she's worked on COVID-19 response and cannabis business permits. Previously, she worked on the websites for affordable housing programs in San Francisco, as well as building inspection at the City of Los Angeles. Anita has given talks at IA Conference, .gov Design, Code for America Summit, League of California Cities, and Confab. We're really excited to talk with Anita today about her significant impact in government. Hi, and welcome to UX Radio. This is Laura Federoff.
And I'm Chris Chandler. And today we are super excited to have a conversation with one of our favorite people, Anita Cheng, who is a content designer at the San Francisco City Digital Services offices. Welcome, Anita.
Hi, I'm really happy to be here and to see my friends. I haven't seen you in a while. Yeah.
Very true. You've had such an amazing background in the circuitous way that you came about this path. Can you start us off and just tell us about your journey?
Yeah. So I'm going to try and make a long story short. In a previous life, I was doing cancer research. I was a molecular biologist in a lab, and I really liked doing the bench work, like the pipetting, all the stuff you see on CSI, but I was not that interested in keeping up with the actual research and doing reading the papers and all that stuff. And I wasn't that interested in going to grad school because I was I like science, but not that much to do it one project for 5 years. I also didn't want to go to med school. So I just sort of stuck around until I figured, well, I'll find something interesting. And then I discovered UX kind of by accident. I like to tell people the story because it's a little bit incredulous, but I discovered an alternate reality game for the movie The Dark Knight. And after it was over, it was 1.5 years of all these puzzles and events and all this content that sort of rained down upon us, and we had fun trying to sort everything out. And after it was all over, I was someone should make an archive of this. And then my next thought was, well, that someone should be me, because clearly nobody else is going to. And that turned into my first website where I discovered IA and UX and that there was a name for all the stuff that I found very, very interesting and exciting in a way that I hadn't really felt before. And then after almost a year, I made this website. It had 475 pages. I learned front end, HTML, CSS to do it. And then I was well, if it's been a year of me working on this and I still love it, I should probably do it for a job. And that was really the turning point where I decided that I was going to try and get into UX. And after a few years of cobbling together an education and going to all the meetups and meeting Chris and Laura and the awesome people in the LA UX community, I eventually got my first job actually in government, which was purely by luck, I'm sure. And I think that was kind of the runway or the launch pad that really propelled me to all of these other amazing these opportunities that I couldn't have foreseen before. But I feel that those early days where I was learning everything and meeting everyone has really paid dividends. So that's the long-ish, short-ish version of how I ended up here.
Yeah. Tell us about that first job in Los Angeles. And then why did you leave us to move to San Francisco?
Yeah. So so that first job was actually, I was a UX team of one. I was doing everything. And it's interesting because in government, we don't have proper job titles. We just call my job a content designer because that's essentially what the role is. But my actual job title, I believe, is technology expert one, which means nothing. It's just sort of a catch-all for everything. And I think in LA, that was kind of the same thing. I got in touch with a recruiter who found me randomly and was like, hey, I think that you'd be good for this job. And it was like website content editor or something like that, where it was kind of a webmastery role. But then I looked in the description and it was mostly IA, like your organized content. And I was like, I can do that. But I ended up also having to code the entire site as well. So the job that I had was at the building department in Los Angeles, which is like building permits and inspections and constructional things. So I learned a lot about how buildings are made in Los Angeles, which is incredibly complicated, and just as complicated, maybe even more in San Francisco. I mean, it's all complicated. Building permits are incredibly complex. And then I ended up making their department website, and it's still online. It still functions essentially the way that I built it like 5 years later. So it's like, well, I must have built it really good if they're still using it. Yeah. And then the reason why I moved up was essentially because of my husband's job. Like he had found a job in San Francisco, and I basically moved up to be with him. But at the same time, I wanted to make sure that I would find like a job that was as impactful as the one I had in LA. And I really lucked out. Like it did seem like a good stepping stone for me as the next step for my career, because it was essentially the same job as in LA, but I would be doing somewhat less coding and a little more user research. So I was like, oh, this is like actually really cool. I get to learn about, affordable housing, which is just as complex and gnarly as building permits, probably even more so. But at least I would not have to like debug everything, which was very exciting. I was still a UX team of one, but at least like, well, I'm just going to not do as much coding. So that was very exciting for me.
So what would you say is your current biggest challenge? What's keeping you up at night?
I am actually, it's been a lot better, because end of last year when I found out I was pregnant, I thought that like I would have to do a lot more transitional work in terms of like, okay, if we're still like lockdown, if we're still in the throes of reopening, which is really complicated to keep track of, I will have to teach someone else to do this. And now, today, June 15th, for those folks who are not in California, this is our big reopening day where everything is reopening. And so I don't have to think about that as much anymore, which is such a huge relief, because I was really worried about that. And I was like, I don't know, I can teach somebody to like read the health orders as fast as I can. I don't know how I can do that. So that's really the part that's keeping me up at night is trying to teach someone else to do what I do, just in case we have to be able to do it when I'm not here. Yeah.
Well, actually, tell us a little bit more about the current role in that, because, I've been, in the crazy year that we've all had, I think you found yourself in an interesting position and actually speaking, about public policy and being an outspoken advocate for public safety. Like, I really felt like, you had a very interesting role in this last year. So say a little bit more about what you've been doing. You just touched on it a little bit.
Let's start from the very beginning.
Yeah.
I hope. So when San Francisco first declared a state of emergency, I believe February 25th last year, and then that was mostly a way for the mayor to be able to take people from other departments, from all sorts of departments, and have us work a role just for that emergency. Because at the time, we didn't have any cases even in San Francisco. It was like, oh, but this is like a formality that like we have to use in order to say like, okay, you used to work in the HR department, but we're going to take you and put you into the Emergency Operations Center, or the EOC. And our team was asked for essentially a webmaster, like, website content editor or whoever. And then we were like, well, we're digital services. We don't do webmastery things. So we're going to send a visual designer and a content person. Like, we need a content people there on this emergency so people can like make sense and like know actually what is going on. And so in those early days, it was like everybody was trying to figure out how to work this particular emergency, because usually if you have an EOC, it's like for a fire or an earthquake, and it's something that's kind of short term. So like people were thinking like, should we make everybody do 12-hour days for like 2 weeks? And then later on, they're like, whoa, this is gonna take a while. So let's not burn everybody out. And those early days we had like 2 week shifts, and I was actually the third content person for my team to go, and I was the one who sort of lasted those 2 weeks, because my brain actually loves all the context switching which a lot of other people can't like keep up with, just because you're just doing 5 things at once. And I was like, oh, this is great, I love it. And so I then was recruited to stay as a content designer for the entire year, and I will finally be demobilized on June 30th, which is when we move out of Moscone, which is where like the EOC finally moved into. And my role originally was to like take whatever the departments gave me in terms of content and put it up on sf.gov, which was our new city website at the time. It was made to be user friendly. It was made to be accessible. We already had content principles for it. It was like, okay, we're going to aim for grade 5. So none of this like legalese, health order language, because for this, like we really need the public's help in this pandemic to make sure that we can save lives. And I think it was actually a really good thing that I stayed on so long, because trying to make everything user-centered, I think a lot of people were aware of, but they didn't know like how to do it. Like a lot of people get scared when you try and like change their stuff, to redesign their stuff, to like rewrite their content is very scary for a lot of people. And the fact that I stayed there for over a year, like people could see the work that I was doing, and people could start to trust me. When I would rewrite their content, it would be like, oh, like Anita's rewriting her content, but she's making it better. Like she's not taking away our power. She's like actually helping us make sure that people understand what we mean. And having that time and that trust has been really invaluable.
That's amazing, especially how you were able to overcome that trust issue.
Yeah, it's been also really interesting, because even early on, we had a couple of champions in the Department of Public Health who really like supported us and championed for us, which was so important, because like, a lot of times when it's just you and you don't have anybody like in leadership really fighting for you, it's just such a losing battle. But like we got really, really lucky that we had a couple of like really great champions.
That's great.
At DPH. Yeah.
You mentioned the content principles, and I know there's a lot of different methodologies for coming up with those. I'm curious about how you tackled that.
Most of our content principles we actually adapted from other content principles that other people had, such as gov.uk. So we have some people on our team who are from the UK government, as well as a civic tech space. And I think that a lot of people acknowledge that they have really been the leaders and the pioneers in terms of content design. And so my boss is actually from gov.uk, and we took their principles and we remixed them for San Francisco, because San Francisco is really special in that they really care about equity. That's something that San Francisco really cares about. And so we had to point out equity, and like we are trying to give a voice to people who don't usually have one. And so that's how we came up with them. So our content principles, I'm looking at our documentation, is start with people, make it easy, write for everyone, engage communities, earn trust, hold ourselves to account, and digital first, which was especially important in this pandemic, because a lot of government processes are done in person, but we could not do them in person during this past year. So it was really the point at which people had to acknowledge that they had to be digital. They were being forced to. And it wasn't like a matter of like, oh, I want to. It was like, no, you have to.
I'm very curious. I don't have any experience or know anything about doing user research in a government context. Like, how do you manage that, and how is it different, do you think, than?
Yeah. I did some user research when I was doing COVID work, it's really hard because like it's just so busy all the time. But I did have a team who has been doing research as well. And I guess it's also hard for me to say because I've only worked in government in UX. That's just sort of how it happened. But I think recruiting is a challenge, but I believe recruiting is always a challenge, no matter what. For the housing department, I did manage to do some user research as a UX team of one by asking the program staff for people who had gone through the process and would be willing to talk about it. Yeah, it was actually a really interesting experience for me because I had never like talked to someone who had like gone through the process before, and just learning what it was like for them was like, wow, like where you have to jump from like this service to this service, like the seams are just like gaping, and it's like, wow, we need to try and fix this. It's going to be hard, but we can do it. For COVID, and especially digital services, we do make it an effort to recruit underserved communities. So we have been working with community partners and CBOs, which are community-based organizations, out in San Francisco who serve like women who serve people with disabilities. And we really want to talk with them because like those are the people who are often kind of left out in the cold, where like, oh, digital first, like, but it's like, if you assume that everyone has a smartphone, if you assume that everyone like can see your colors, then you'll be missing a huge part of the population who needs those services. And we kind of figured that if we can make sure that our services work for people who don't have smartphones or who are colorblind or who use screen readers, that it'll just help everybody. So that has definitely been a challenge for us. And also COVID has been a challenge because in the before times, we used to sometimes do research by doing intercepts, like out in the library or out on the permit counter. We'd stop people and ask them to look at a page for like 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes. And we couldn't do that anymore because of COVID. And so everything was remote, which had some good things and bad things, because if it was remote, we could record it and we could like take notes and caption it and have like a way to show people what we saw. And at the intercepts, you're not able to do that. We also did some research in places like the women's building where they would have a computer lab where we could sit with them and watch them do the thing. But again, it's really hard to record on other computers. So I don't think we have recordings of that besides audio. Like we would have an audio recording of that, but not like the screenshot of them clicking around and with their arrows and things. But it's definitely a challenge.
I was wondering, like, do you get a lot of resistance from people who don't understand the point or are nervous about getting that feedback? I mean, I'm used to resistance more from the corporate world, right? Where people are, scared of their
like,
users.
Money.
Right. I want to get money. I don't want to show them stuff, right? Like, but in government context, right? I mean, normally the public is kind of kept at arm's length, right? Like, hey, you got your 2 minutes to speak at the public meeting and that's it, kind of.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
So it's cool that you got that support for that.
Yeah, I think I'm trying to think about my own experience as well as my team's experience, which I can't speak to as well. But when I was doing the housing research, like they were really happy for me to talk with applicants because they talk with applicants all the time. So when you apply for affordable housing, like it is an online form now, but like a lot of people also prefer being able to talk one-on-one with the housing staff. And so like they are almost like customer service people where they understand that it's good to talk with the applicants because like they will show you things that you have missed in your program. And so having that direct contact with our quote unquote customers, I think has been really important for our stakeholders to understand how important it is to do user research. Like the project that I had before COVID was actually the cannabis business permit. And we were creating the cannabis business permit for San Francisco. So if you wanted to if you wanted to sell cannabis, manufacture, grow, whatever, in San Francisco, you needed a business permit. And It was tricky to do the user research for that, but we had support all the way from the office because they wanted a good like product, like they wanted a good service. Like we want people to be able to have a cannabis business in San Francisco, and that's very important to them. And so they really want to make it work. And we were supported all the way for that user research because they had that goal of we want to make this work. It's not just like pushing out a new feature or anything like that. I mean, the process is still incredibly hard and incredibly expensive, but in ways that better content or a better online form cannot really help at the end of the day. Just because it's like, oh, like everything has to do with policy. Oh man, okay. Now that we fixed like the form, we fixed the survey, like, you know, we have fixed the content, but the policy itself is still just really gnarly to go through.
All right, I can explain it to you better, but it's still messed up policy, right? So complicated.
Yeah, I can explain it to you better, but sometimes I'm just sort of like, oh, but why do oh man, I have to explain that. Oh man.
Especially with cannabis, there's so much compliance around it as well.
Although I think like so in general, opening a business in San Francisco is really hard because of the permits process. I don't think that's a surprise to anybody because there has been a lot of reporting on that lately. So that's just part of it too. So that like I'm actually pretty sure that like the permitting process for like businesses and buildings is gnarlier than COVID because I have a colleague who's working on it, and I hear stories about like having to work with these stakeholders, this department, and trying to get them all to work together. I'm like, oh man, that is harder than COVID. I'm just going to tell you.
Well, I'll just say here in Santa Monica, I'm still waiting for our first dispensary, even though the city had an RFP for it 2.5 years ago. So they still haven't permitted our first dispensary here in Santa Monica.
Yeah, that sounds familiar. It's the same like in a lot of places. That's just right now, but we are trying to fix it. But in order to fix it, we have to like go all the way up to like, okay, how do we actually make this policy work for people?
Right.
Yeah.
You mentioned a little bit earlier about the community partners, the CBOs. I think that's tremendous work that you're doing. Can you share a story with us about an aha moment there, or how you took something from those underserved community members that you interviewed and applied it to the design?
I don't know if I can think of a specific example right now, especially because just because we observe something, it doesn't mean that we can implement it right away. It's just like, oh, an observation. There was one user we talked to who used a keyboard to traverse the site, and that is definitely like one way to test out if your site is actually keyboard accessible, to see if someone who actually uses this feature on their computer can use it. And she also used a wheelchair and also had a caregiver explaining everything, and that was just so illuminating to see. And the prompt was to find a COVID testing site. And that was actually really illuminating because it uncovered a lot of things that we hadn't thought of before. Like when you think COVID testing, oh, you just go in and you take a test, but then like that their concern was, am I able to bring a caregiver? Is it wheelchair accessible? That's very, very important to them, because otherwise, like, why even bother going? That kind of thing. And like having those insights, like, just gives you way more perspective about what other people's experiences are, and they're completely different from yours. Completely different.
Yeah, absolutely. As my adult son is disabled, and so we had a huge question about when we could get vaccinated, right, as his caregivers. So it was kind of interesting that we got included, and can't remember now. I think it seems like it might have been county by county.
It was in the early days, county by county.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was surprised to learn that we were counted in tier 1 as medical professionals, as caregivers. Mm-hmm. And then he, as a 22-year-old male, didn't qualify until the next tier with his disability. So it's kind of interesting, like caregivers first.
Right. Yeah, that's really interesting how like has been a huge part of the work that I've been doing the past year is like, okay, this is the policy, this is the rule, but then what does that mean when you go into these like specific cases of like, but what if this and this and this and this. And then you're like, oh, I just blew it up. Now I have to talk to somebody at DPH about what this actually means. Yeah.
Yeah, even just rewriting content so that it's understandable. I mean, we could probably spend an hour just talking about that, how to turn government speak into human speak.
Yeah, that is something that I definitely have to teach somebody else to do, especially about COVID, because I had certain like strategies I was using. It has been interesting because most of the time when you do content design, it's like I am interpreting very government speak into something that's task-based and something you can use. But for COVID, we were also trying to insert a lot of behavior change into that too, which you don't usually get the room to do in content design because you're just basically telling people what to do. But then it's like, well, we're telling people what to do, but like we also don't want to say like, you have to do this because like that was part of San Francisco's strategy is not to like punish people for like disobeying the health orders. Like we want to encourage you to do the right thing, but we're not going to like scold you for it. And so that was an interesting like approach of doing that work.
And I'm going to say in your Twitter feed, I feel like I might have heard a little more scolding, Anita, from you.
A little bit, yes. Yeah. But it wasn't coming
that's
from...
That's your personal...
That was my personal thing.
Yeah.
Where you're just sort of like watching this and you're like, yeah.
How are you feeling now, like as things are opening back up, and how does your team feel about that?
I'm actually feeling pretty good. I'm wondering if that's because I have such an inside look at the whole process. Because starting, I want to say late last year, they started to bring me into earlier and earlier meetings, which as a content designer, like this is what you want, right? It's like, please bring me in early enough so I can actually design the thing that you're talking about versus like, oh, I have no time and therefore I have to either panic, speed read, or like just slap it on the website. And then I think early this year, I was invited to the DPH clinical policy meetings, which is where a bunch of people from DPH actually get together to discuss what to reopen in San Francisco and why. And that was just so illuminating because it's not like rewriting content that you're given, but also learning what people's like thoughts are in terms of their opinions, how they think things are working, and their mental models. And just seeing where these clinicians were in terms of like, okay, this is where we are right now in terms of like cases. Here's a situation with around the world with like similar situations, because they were doing a lot of research like into the papers that are being published like around the world about like transmission and stuff like that, and trying to find other examples from other places of like, well, if we reopen locker rooms, what does that mean in terms of like aerosols and like people being around each other, that kind of thing. And I saw how much discussion was happening and how democratic it was. And I just felt better about the whole process. It's like, oh, like we are going to reopen thanks to the support of a bunch of people. It's not just one person deciding at the end of the, so at the end of the day, it is the health officer who decides what to open, but like it is a democratic process and like people do discuss it. And I saw that process happening and just made me feel very confident that we were like doing things the right way, or at least like the best that we could given the constraints that we had, because we're also beholden to like the federal government as well as a state. It's like we can't be too different because then people get really confused. So that as well. But I'm feeling pretty good just because like I have seen like that whole process behind the scenes, and also like vaccines, like the fact that we have them, it's just like, wow. Go science.
Seriously, go science.
Go science.
Can switch gears a little bit here, because we usually ask our guests if they have any advice for, people entering the field. And I want to ask you about that. But I want to tell you that I use you as a model often when I'm giving advice, because I think, there's a few other people I know, but in particular, I felt like you really dove into the community. You really gave a lot to the community. And I feel like that worked out. It paid off. And so I'm sort of curious, like, how you felt about that. Was that like a deliberate strategy? Like you continue to give to the community of UX. And I think that that's why I say you're a good example when junior people are saying like, well, how do I get into the field? It's like, yeah, getting the first job is tough, but there's all these organizations that need help and would love your hard work. So
Yeah.
a little bit about
Yeah,
that.
thank you. Yeah, it's been actually a really amazing journey because yes, so the first job that I got in the government at the city of LA, I did come upon it sort of by luck. But the important thing to note is that that was the very first job that I had to apply cold. Like everything else after that, I did by referral, and that is because like I invested time to meet other people in the community, kind of all over. And it's not even that I was like good friends with the people that I got referred to. It was like I knew someone who knew someone, and like one really powerful thing that I learned early on was that like people are just excited to be the same, to be excited about the same thing that you're excited by. And so if you have that like eagerness and like willingness to help, like other people will help you. And that's just amazing, powerful thing to realize. And another thing I also realized is that what really gets me going at the end of the day is helping people. I like to overhelp sometimes, I feel, but it really, really excites me to be able to like to empower someone in that way. And I think that's why I did decide early on to participate in the design communities, even though I still didn't find my first job that way. But like everything else after that has been so much easier because I have the community to like refer to. I have people that I can ping whenever I need like help or advice and to learn from, because I've learned so much from other people, which I think is super important in the tech space because tech is changing so fast that by the time you read it, even on a website, it's kind of outdated. You read a book, it's like, forget it. It's just sort of like, it's good to know kind of the basics, and it can't be just from courses and books and websites. It has to be from other people because people are at the forefront of everything in tech. And,
when did you discover, oh, sorry, I was just going to ask when you discovered that you had the superpower of live tweeting, because that was the first superpower of yours that I was introduced to. It was like, holy cow, what a skill to be able to bring people along who aren't at this event.
Yeah, and live tweeting, I think I discovered this really early on because I remember my first, it wasn't even an in-person event. It was kind of I think it was an online event. Like early on, I was still taking design classes at Pasadena City College. Like I think it was called A Day for Design or something. And I was just live tweeting all of these talks. And it was a way for me to take notes, honestly, at first, because if I don't multitask, my brain just sort of gets bored. And so I was like, oh, this is a way for me to take notes and also share with other people what I'm learning. And it was only very recently that I also discovered that live tweeting was actually great practice for this COVID work, because I have to take all this content from the health order, from the directives, from like the guidance, from DPH, who have so many things to say. Like it's not bad content. It's just a lot of it. Like it's just so much stuff that they want you to learn that it's like, okay, like you're overwhelming people. It's all great content. It's and if people want to, they can refer to the long stuff. But like for the people who don't have time, who are stressed out, like how do you distill that into a couple of sentences? And that was something that live tweeting taught me. just because I think for like 3 or 4 years, I was doing it really regularly at every event I was going to, just because it was just like, oh, this is how I'm going to take notes and this is how I'm going to synthesize what I am learning.
That's so clever. Yeah. I was trying to remember, did we meet you at LAUX meetup? Did we first meet at IA Summit? Like I went through all the things.
Yeah,
UXPA, LA.
It might have been a World IA Day kind of early on.
True.
Maybe. Yeah. I think I went to one in like Pasadena, like Art Center.
Art Center.
Oh, that's the one I was working with. Yeah. And Chris spoke at that one.
Well, yeah. So, hey, to level up, right? There was live tweeting at events, and now you've actually been organizing and participating in the organizing of conferences and events like World AI Day. So that's a little bit different, but also
Yeah,
super
yeah.
valuable.
It's also another way for people new to the industry to really level up, because when you volunteer at those events, volunteer at conferences, like you get to meet and work with a lot of like the movers and shakers, right? And it's just such a fulfilling experience to participate and be part of this project, because I feel like you aren't really close to someone until you've like worked a project or struggled with them somehow. Just like for COVID, it's like I have made so many friends during this experience with COVID, where we've known each other for weeks, but like we work together so closely, and like we're all going through the same struggles, that like you have this like meeting of the heart
Right.
to be like, we're in this
Exactly.
together, and we're gonna get through it. And when it's over, we're going to like have a pool party or something. Yeah.
So when you think about all of the amazing things that you've done in government, and then thinking about your future, what would you like your legacy to be?
Yeah, I mean, one of the first things that strikes me about this whole experience is that I can't believe I was able to do it, to be able to participate in something like this and to make this much of an impact. Like, this is not something that I first saw when I got my first job at the city of Los Angeles. I think it was just over 5 years ago. Like, I think like a couple months ago, there was that tweet that was going around going like, everyone who tried to answer and the job interview question, where do you see yourself 5 years from now, was completely wrong. And I was like, oh yeah, oh wow, I really hadn't thought about 5 years ago. I was just getting started in this. I think that I would like my legacy to be just having an impact on people, having the chance to empower people. And it's something that has driven me this whole time. And it's also kind of nice because like it's not just like at a huge scale like for COVID. It's like it's even if I help someone navigate the waters of career changes, which is what I love talking to people about. Like the fact that I went from being a molecular biologist to a content designer doing COVID has definitely been a journey, and I want to help people navigate that. And even on that one-on-one interaction, it's very powerful for me to be able to do that. So just being able to scale that is, I guess, the next step. I don't really know what's next after COVID. I guess, well, it is kind of good timing that I'm having this baby like right after COVID. So it's like, okay, I'm going to do that. And then like see where my head's at after that. Cause like because I would like to stay with my team for a while yet, just because like I really like seeing things through and just seeing where we end up after COVID, and all the work that we've been doing about helping businesses reopen, all that stuff, and then just seeing like where our team goes in helping other city departments try and go digital, try and have better services. Because I feel like this COVID experience like really opened a lot of people's eyes to how important it is to have good, robust services that people can navigate. And it is definitely an opportunity that we didn't have before, which is kind of like, because I'm sure there's a German word for it, where like this is terrible, but this is also an opportunity, and it's actually ultimately good for us as a team to be able to do this. But it's also like it took a pandemic, it really took a pandemic for people to say like, oh, government services need to be better, and then we should give that a chance. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you so much. How do people keep in touch with you or follow you? I know you're still pretty big on Twitter.
Yeah, I'm still on Twitter, all the live tweeting. I haven't been doing a whole lot of live tweeting because there have not been many events at all. And I'm usually multitasking with other things if I'm listening to them online. But I am at Anita Y. Cheng on Twitter, ANITAYCHENG on Twitter. And I think that's probably the best way to look for me publicly, just because
great.
I'm there.
We'll include those in the show notes. And also you're hiring, I believe, correct?
Yes, my team is hiring. No design roles right now, but we are hiring for a chief data officer. You can find all of our roles at digitalservices.sfgov.org/join us. And we're still interviewing for a chief data officer. We just opened a role for a project manager, which may include user research, organizing user research, I believe. We're hiring a senior product manager for sf.gov. So to make that site better, which is always really exciting. And we also just opened a role for a senior web developer for our affordable housing application. So if you want to fix affordable housing in San Francisco, definitely look us up.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, it's been exciting to hear how much impact you've really had. And I'm sure you're an inspiration to everyone listening. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you. Thank you. Just keep going, people. That's one of the first things that struck me after realizing how I could do this work well, was that a lot of the things that I thought were a liability early on were actually an asset. Like the fact that I always need to context switch, like doing 5 things at once, kind of like was like, very frustrating for people. But now like it turns out that I needed to be able to do that, to do this work. And all of the things that I thought were maybe like frivolous before, like the live tweeting, like live tweeting, I'm just like, but it actually helped me practice for this work. And so if you find something interesting, just go for it. Just see where it leads you. Yeah.
UX Radio is produced by Laura Federoff and Chris Chandler. If you want more UX Radio, you can subscribe to our podcast on iTunes and Google Play, or go to ux-radio.com, where you'll find podcasts, resources, and more. This episode is brought to you by Philosophy. Philosophy helps entrepreneurs and organizations validate and develop their promising ideas through agile design, rapid prototyping, and software craftsmanship. To learn more, visit philosophy.is.